What can Gen Z learn from the idea of the elephant and its rider?
The Elephant and Its Rider was Jonathan Haidt, and we're going back many years now. So it was definitely a big part of The Righteous Mind, his breakthrough book really in 2012, where he tried to talk about why we're so divided in the culture wars, why we're so divided in politics. I think he also trailed the idea in The Happiness Hypothesis, which was an earlier book, but he really goes to town on The Elephant and Its Rider as a way of explaining how people tick. We might think that people are rational agents. We just calmly, coolly collect the data and we make our choices and it's all rational. And he said, no, it's much more like, imagine an elephant that has its own desires and it might want to go down into the valley and get lost in the spider webs. And there's a rider on top of the elephant and he's yabbering away and he's trying to pull at the reins and he has some degree of control over the elephant, but really it's the elephant that's in charge. And he said, basically our instincts are the elephant and our rational mind is the rider. And I think he's absolutely right that this is the way human beings tick. We have instincts, we have intuitions, we have this gut level observance of the world. It's very imagistic. It's very pattern noticing. And we lean into things on the basis of gut and intuition and instinct, and less because I'm a cool, calm, calculated, rational person who's making these choices. And so I think that has a lot of implications for Gen Z and for everybody else, in that I think we had been sold in the modern world a picture of the human person that's very rationalist. We are Homo sapiens, right? And sapiens means the wise men, okay? That's what sort of differentiates us from all the other animals. We're the clever ones, right? We've got brains and we can think hard. We're very rational. But I think it's interesting that Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist, a moral psychologist, who is noticing that we are much more rationalizers than rational. If I rationalize something, it's because I already wanted this thing, and I'll then come up with a whole bunch of reasons why that thing is the correct and clever thing to have done. And you see this, like if you're trying to argue a friend out of going out with this girl or this guy, and their heart is in it, and you try and bring rational arguments. You try to say, have you thought about the pros and cons of this particular human being? Because from my point of view, this is an irrational decision. This person's mind is being made up by their heart. And Jonathan Haidt is here to say that is all of life. And it explains the culture wars. It explains why you make the bad decisions in your life. It explains why you're not the rational person you thought you were.
There's so much to unpick. And I think love is a good concept to start with because we all feel this felt sense that there's something metaphysical to it. It's not just a swirling around of hormones and emotions and chemicals in our brains. There's maybe an extra dimension to it. Even if we don't necessarily believe it, we act that way, certainly, when we are in love with someone. And you see these quotes of choosing who you let yourself fall in love with, because once you're in love, that's it. No rational argument will pull you out of it. Hey, they've spent all your money on your credit card and they're hitting you twice a week at home and they're always unhappy. You're always unhappy. You're making each other worse humans. Yeah, but I love them.
Yeah. So
love's a great springboard for this. And the thing that fascinates me with all of this is stemming from Thomas Cranmer. He speaks about how what the heart loves, the will decides, and the mind justifies.
Rationalizes. Yeah.
And there are a few questions that come from that. Namely, what is the heart? What is the will? And what is the mind?
Right.
What is this distinction? And it's worth pointing out that you are a Christian pastor for the audience at home. So you will have your presuppositions underlying your belief of this. But it's a worthy investigation. Where's your stance on this? That separation between the heart, the will, the mind. Are they not the same thing?
I don't think they're the same thing, and I don't think anyone's really thought they're the same thing until very, very recently. So, like even Aristotle, going back 4th century BC, he would say that the human person is we're a little bit like a chariot that's been driven by two horses, and the horses are going in opposite directions, right? And that we are these split creatures between our reason and our passions.
Mm.
And of course, as a philosopher, Aristotle is going to say, I think that reason can rule over the passions, and that the clever way forward is to find the golden mean between passions that will lead you in these two different directions. And so I think everybody has always had to deal with what we experience as humans, which is, the heart goes in a certain direction and the head says this might not be the wisest choice. I think we all deal with that. I think the Christian part of things is like in the medieval period, starting with Augustine, so this sort of African 5th century theologian, he was noticing what Plato and Aristotle would say about there is goodness, truth, and beauty. And, the classical mind, this is not uniquely a Christian thing, but the classical mind sort of thought that there are these transcendent ideals. There is goodness, which is about how you act in the world. There's truth, which is how you think. And there's beauty, which is how you feel, right? And so I think everybody has always considered that the human person is attentive to those three realms. And you get to Archbishop Cranmer, so he was the Archbishop of Canterbury in the 16th century, and he wrote the Anglican prayer book, and he, as he's writing his prayers, is a very hearty theologian, because he's noticing that the scriptures are full of this stuff. Jesus said, "From out of the heart come our thoughts, and then our kind of behavior." And Cranmer was basically Almighty God, unto whom all hearts be open, all desires known, and from whom no secrets are hid. Cleanse the thoughts of our hearts by the inspiration of thy Holy Spirit, that we may perfectly love thee and worthily magnify thy holy name. And one of the phrases in that's sort of what you say at the beginning of, I think it's morning prayer, the thoughts of the heart, right? That's a biblical phrase going back to Genesis, in fact, the thoughts of the heart. Which it's not exactly how our modern anthropology kind of says things, that the heart's just a pump that's, part of your circulatory system. But I think we all understand what that means, that it's our heart that makes up our minds at the end of the day. And so I would say that Cranmer represents the kind of Christian tradition that is taking the best from the classical world, and that has shaped our moral sensibilities nowadays. And I think we still recognize that, my heart says one thing, my head says another. We still have that sense. And I would say that's been a profoundly Christianized kind of a thing. And I would say that modern notions of how we tick quite reductionistic. I fell in love with the girl, or did you? Or, did her pheromones increase your dopamine?
Yeah.
I think that's lacking. And I think that's why a lot of Gen Z are seeing that a modern scientific understanding of the person is not very satisfying, and they might be open to a more ancient view of the person.
How do you know when to trust your heart, even if we just call that the subconscious, perhaps, that's more emotionally guided,
right,
if it is guided by emotion? And how do you know when to trust your head if it's driven by logic that may miss out the bigger picture of things?
Yeah, and I think both of those things need to be informed on the Christian understanding. Both of those things need to be informed by the Word. And when I say word, you might think Bible, and I think that's true. But I think also the proclamation about Jesus, the proclamation of a Jesus-shaped view of the world, and the wisdom of the community that is speaking to you. I think the Christian understanding is that there is a wisdom that needs to come from outside yourself that calibrates both your heart and your head, because you're naturally simple and you're very liable to make foolish decisions. So the classic book in the Bible about this is the book of Proverbs, and it's 31 chapters. The last 21 chapters are, in fact, the last 22 chapters are these sort of fortune cookie aphorisms. Things like don't answer a fool according to his folly, or you'll become like him. that sort of thing. And lots of people just love reading those proverbs as a little bit of fortune cookie, bit of wisdom, and it's sort of you imbibe that, and hopefully you live a wise life. But actually, the first 10 chapters, it's all about King Solomon saying to his son, the crown prince, you need to get wisdom because folly is seducing you the entire time. And it weaves between wisdom you need and folly you need to reject. And then also, the father is telling his son, there is an adulteress that is trying to seduce you, and you need to find a good woman. And you're meant to make the comparison that actually wisdom is a person who you can relate to, and folly is very person-like in its ability to seduce you and then to get you repeating the mistakes that you've constantly made. And so the matter of wisdom is a matter of head and heart being set on the right object of your love, right? And your head needs to be set on the right object of love, just as your heart needs to be set on the right object of your love. And you constantly need the wisdom of others. Proverbs is full of plans fail for a lack of counselors, right? And so you're constantly, I love this. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 5 says, the purposes of your heart are deep waters, but a person of understanding draws them out. I think that's very deep. I look down inside my heart and I think I'm transparent to myself. I'm not transparent to myself, but I have a conversation with you and you'll notice that I use I might just say something like, oh, I really should do better there. And you can notice things about me. You can say, why did you say should there? You go, oh yeah. Do I feel this moral obligation to go in this direction? And you are at that point, the person of understanding that's drawing out from my heart. So you don't just follow your heart in the Bible's understanding. The heart needs to be tutored. The heart needs to be formed and shaped by a broader community and by a word that comes from beyond.
I wonder about the link between your actions and your heart.
Yeah.
I think it's a stronger one than the link between your actions and your thoughts.
Yes.
I would presuppose that elephant we speak about is much closer linked to your actions.
Yes.
Or maybe the right way around would be that your actions are linked to that elephant. They are indicative of what you truly believe.
Right.
Whereas you can think all of these things and you can kind of mentally gymnast your way into believing that you're a certain type of person or you're making a certain type of impact in the world, when actually deep down, if you really got to it, you were just craving power or fame or money or whatever it is.
Yeah.
What do you think to that link between the elephant, actions, thoughts?
Yeah. It's exactly right. And Jordan Peterson's been saying this for 10 years plus. And, people get exasperated. Christians and non-Christians get exasperated with Jordan Peterson for all sorts of reasons. But he is absolutely right to say what you think you believe will be betrayed by your actions, and he is, and I like this about him, he is not content to have a conversation simply about, I'm going to tell you the contents of my beliefs and you're going to tell me the contents of your beliefs. And that tells us something deep about who we are. I don't think that's true at all. I watch you and I'll see what you really believe. You'll watch me and you'll see what I really believe. I say it's not going to rain today, but I bring the umbrella with me. What do I really believe about the weather? I think it really might rain. I might tell you we're in a drought and this drought is never going to break. You can absolutely just believe me at that stage. And this goes back to the Proverbs chapter 20 verse where it's like the purposes of your heart are deep waters. Someone else draws them out. Someone else can see me better than I can see myself. And so it's absolutely true that the contents of my head are not very interesting in finding out what I believe, the way that I live. Because life is constantly leaning into what the elephant is going after, and you are totally always being led by that elephant. And I think you put it really well. That let's watch where the elephant goes, and that will tell people what you actually believe.
So we need people to draw out the elephant from us.
Yeah.
How do we avoid being misguided by these external influences? Perhaps they're going to grab our elephant by the tusk and pull it in the opposite direction to where it truly wanted to go.
Yeah.
And a kind of bro philosophy theory I've had the last month thinking about this concept a lot is that over the last couple of decades, with increasing social media use, big corporations absolutely dominating. The death of artisan, small individual companies, or the guy going to the market to get his fish. It feels like there's the potential that we've been told a certain thing as a generation, surface level, mapped onto our elephants, so to speak. We've been told and led in a certain direction when it's completely alien to the direction that the elephant was initially going to go in. Then you've got the rider coming in, justifying the direction, saying, this is happiness, this is freedom, this is liberation, this is progress. I wonder if that's what's lying at the bottom and at the root of a lot of the issues we're facing today. It's that our subconscious, our real wills, what fulfills us, has been misguided, and it's been misguided by other individuals, nefarious individuals who care about money, fame, profits. And we've got this kind of Stockholm syndrome going on where we're using our riders and our intellect, our left brain dominated culture, to say, this is progress.
So maybe the algorithm is giving amphetamines to the elephants, right? and what is a rider to do except to, in caps locks, tweet out where the elephant has gone. But is that what you mean? That actually the social media is pushing us towards extreme views and camps and siloing us, but
even disregarding the extremity. Just the direction in general. I think it's taken a turn that potentially, perhaps, goes against our instincts and goes against where that elephant would have gone if it wasn't pulled in another direction by technology. And my interface with a screen that is a solo experience of simply vision and audio, that is a very disconnected experience of life. And this becomes the prism through which I see all things, as opposed to touch grass, as opposed to an embodied sense of who I am, breathing the same air as 20 other people, shoulder to shoulder in some common enterprise that is embodied and physical and challenging. And I think that's a very different way of seeing the world, and it's absolutely shaping us in ways that I think people are noticing. That's why you have phrases like touch grass. I think people are recognizing that this is a very narrow window onto reality, and I want to go outside in more senses than one, and experience the wisdom that comes from butting up against real life, butting up against like real people. When I say the nasty thing online, I don't see a reaction. When I say the nasty thing in person, oh, that made you feel bad, which made me feel bad, and it's just a radically different way of encountering the world. You're detached from the real world's consequences, and you have this moral detachment from your actions. I think all of this at the extreme manifests in major cognitive dissonance. You're told one thing, you're justifying it, you are putting Gymshark models as obese ladies who are representing a sports brand and they're unhealthy. And then you get a culture that goes, hang on a minute, this doesn't make any sense. And these ladies aren't any happier just because they're put on a pedestal as a sort of glorified virtue signal. So I do see people cottoning on to the fact that something's been led astray, and they're going to get to the point, I think, when they realize it's their own elephants. But I suppose the question is, what does come next? How do you bring those two into alignment? And back to a point earlier that we kind of briefly touched on, how do you make sure that you don't get led astray again if you go chasing your heart? Because we're kind of saying that people's hearts are potentially in the wrong place through no fault of their own or through their own faults. But then also, at the same time, paradoxically, we've got this issue where people are following their heart too much. So how do we get them back in line with their hearts, but not over prioritize emotion?
Yes, and the heart is different from emotion, and that's helpful to say. It's different from just passions, and we've had a kind of the Romantics were this sort of historical movement, this artistic movement that was a real sort of reaction to the rapid industrialization that was happening with the Industrial Revolution. And, you get the sort of the dark satanic mills of England sort of belching the pollution out into the air and everything becoming incredibly mechanical. And then you had William Wordsworth sort of going off and wandering lonely as a cloud and kind of, and that was a helpful corrective to the mechanical view of life. But the over-romanticized view of the heart is that it just then becomes the emotions, which then can become the passions, which then can become just your base instincts. And then you're really in trouble because you're chasing the dopamine hit, right? So what the heart means is really about your desire.
Mm-hmm.
And Augustine said this fascinating thing. He said that the heart of your desire is what you really want, but the desire of your heart you don't want to follow, right? Because think about G.K. Chesterton said, everyone banging on the door of a brothel is looking for God. Okay, it's interesting kind of, and he was very Augustinian in his understanding of how people tick. I'm sure he would have loved The Righteous Mind and The Horse and Its Rider. The Elephant and Its Rider. He said that everyone banging on the door of the brothel is looking for God, in that they're looking for a transcendent experience of communion, and they're looking in exactly the wrong place for it, right? And so from one point of view, are they following their heart? Well, yes, but they're following their heart in that base instincts kind of way that corrupts you. And everything in your life that has corrupted you and twisted you and distorted you and turned you in on yourself is you chasing... You're not ordering your desires correctly. You've gone for communion, but you've gone for a lesser communion. You've gone for an experience of transcendence, but it's a lesser experience of transcendence.
What do you mean by that?
So instead of the kind of communion that is more than transactional with a prostitute, right? You should be going for the kind of communion with an actual person who loves you for you, right? And you trace those desires all the way to the top, and you get to God. You should aim for communion with God. But there is this ordering of desires, and we've got this disorder of desires, and we're always looking for love in all the wrong places. And the desire of my heart will go astray because my heart is foolish naturally. But the heart of my desire is something good. I've never been tempted by anything that is ugly, right? I can't make myself want anything that is ugly. But it's like the cheesecake. It looks good, but it's gone moldy. But I'll forget the moldiness. That's all right. I'll just go for it. And it's the goodness of the cheesecake that draws me to that thing. And I've never been tempted by anything that's undesirable. But if I inordinately desire something and put it in the number one place when it should be in the number 3 place, that's what twists me. That's why the guy knocks on the door of the brothel when he should be seeking God. And what Augustine kind of says is the desire of your heart is like the guy knocking on the brothel door. The heart of your desire is that you would have a transcendent experience of communion with the one who knows you and loves you more than you love yourself, right? For Augustine, God, right? And where I will never find that is in simply chasing the desire of my heart. And that's where community comes in. Mm-hmm. That's where a word from beyond comes in to reorient my longings and to wake me up to the mold on the cheesecake. I need all those things to form my heart so that when Augustine's famous for saying, love God and do what you want. Because if you love God, you're not going to knock on the brothel door. Because that's what people think. You're like, love God and do what you want. Oh, great. So I go to mass on a Sunday and I go to the brothel on the Saturday night. No. If you really love God, that's not where you will seek that communion and that transcendence. And so, the heart is not following your passions. The heart needs to be formed. It needs to be shaped. It needs to be tutored. It needs to be shaped by something beyond it. The word, community, the person of understanding who sees what I really love, what I really think.
Can we get to the heart using our intellectual capacities?
We can certainly reflect on the heart intellectually, and we can certainly take stock of where our elephant has been. We can do an elephant tracker app, and we can see, all the all the dark valleys that the elephant has gone on, and the mind is very good at calculating what are the what can you expect if I take a step in this direction. The mind can be helpful in saying, Glen, come on, you take a step in that direction, you're going to take 3 more, and where are you going to end up? So it's not a sub-rational thing to pay attention to your heart and to your desires. We need the fullness of our personhood, and as you said, we're not going to know what we think unless we look at our actions. So it needs to be the goodness, truth, and beauty kind of working together, and it needs to be what the heart loves, the will chooses, and the mind justifies. We need all those faculties to make up our person. We need to be reflective about all of them.
I think this is something that people often get wrong with Christianity and any religion. It's that you can dupe God into thinking that your heart is in a certain place based solely on your actions by doing these 5 prayers a day or whatever it may be, and then going off for a cigarette and a pint down the pub, and a bacon sandwich. But what I really, really appreciate with the Christian faith is the fact that you can't fool God just with your actions. God is in your heart, and you need to love him, and everything else comes downstream from that. I mean, I love it, the whole love God and do what you want. It's so great because within that, there's this kind of fortified syllogism of what Christianity is. And it's that if you love God and what that represents, everything else follows accordingly. Pascal points this out with his wager. I would love for you to flesh that out for me. What is Pascal's wager?
Pascal's wager comes in Pascal's thoughts. He would be great in the age of Twitter. He would have been brilliant. He would have been a brilliant. What do we even call them with X? Xer? Twitter? Anyway, I shall never call it X. It will always remain Twitter for me. But he wrote this book that was really, actually, they were the notes for a book that he was going to write if he lived longer. He died in his 30s, tragically young. He was an absolute genius, mathematical genius, pioneered much of what we take to be the scientific method today. A real kind of Renaissance man in lots of different ways. So in about 1662, I believe, he died, and his pensées, his thoughts, were published. It was this. It was going to be a longer book, and in the thoughts, he said he wanted to aim it at his philosophy-loving secular friends who didn't come with him to church on a Sunday, and he wanted to make them see. He said he wanted people of goodwill to wish Christianity were true, and then show them that it is. So there's the heart, right? He understands that we follow what we love, and he was very much in the Augustinian tradition. What we love, our minds then sort of follows after. So he wants people to wish Christianity were true and then show them that it is. A couple of times in his pensées, he talks about Pascal's wager. He doesn't name it Pascal's wager himself, but it's about this bet, and he's basically saying to his non-church going philosophy friends, you don't come with me to church on a Sunday, but let me show you that's irrational, because if you bet on God, and by that he means commit yourself to, at the very least, come to church, maybe pray, join me on my Christian journey and see if any of these beliefs follow. If you bet on God and he exists, you've won infinitely. If he doesn't exist, you haven't lost very much. Just a Sunday morning, okay? And you might enjoy going on the left bank of the Seine and discussing philosophy with all your friends, and maybe you've lost a little bit by not having brunch on a Sunday morning, but going to church. Okay, but you haven't lost very much. And if God exists and you haven't bet on him, you stand to lose infinitely, okay? And so he's basically saying to his philosophy-loving, gambling-loving friends, if you were the rational person you thought you were, you'd join me in church. But you don't, do you? And what he's really trying to do first and foremost in Pascal's wager is to prove one of the things that he says in Pascal's, in his Pensées. He says, the heart has its reasons, of which reason knows nothing.
Mm.
The heart has its reasons, of which reason knows nothing. He's a very heart-driven guy. He's not really saying fake it till you make it, guys. He's saying, even if you did fake it for the sake of infinite reward, you would take the bet. You don't take the bet, which just goes to show you're not driven by your reason after all, are you? The reason why you don't go to church is because you don't want to. That's Pascal's wager, although that's not how it's commonly thought of.
Mm. Why do you think it's so misconstrued?
It's easy to misunderstand it because it's just in note form in a book that's not really a book.
Mm.
He says it in sketchy form and then sort of breaks off and goes and talks about something else, says it in another sketchy form and breaks off. And so it's convenient to be able to dismiss it because it is dismissible. You know, Christopher Hitchens sort of, says it's I love Alex O'Connor says it's half-hearted arse licking. Just in case. A bit of half-hearted arse. Do a bit of half-hearted arse licking with God just in case. Is one way of seeing Pascal's wager as though I'm just going to fake it with God and maybe he'll reward me.
Mm.
So I think because it's so easy to misconstrue, people do like to misconstrue it because the heart has its reasons, of which reason knows nothing. But I think when you see it in context, Pascal is not encouraging half-hearted arse-licking. He's showing you why you don't do the arse-licking in the first place.
Mm.
Because you're a heart-driven creature, actually.
Mm. So we've got the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a concept that makes sense and there's a lot of substance to it. It's reflected in our behavior, but it's a little bit off the wall, highfalutin, philosophical, maybe not grounded in any proof.
Mm.
And Nietzsche speaks about this. You quote him in your book. He says, pity on the whole thwarts the law of evolution, which is the law of selection.
Mm.
In other words, nature selects the strong and eliminates the weak.
Mm.
Who are we to disobey this law, a law that has given us life? So this is railing against the idea of heart at all and letting nature take its course based on the evidence in front of us. What do you think to this?
Nietzsche was quite a hearty guy as well. He just thought that Christianity had the wrong end of the stick when it came to the sorts of passions and the sorts of emotions and the sorts of gut instincts that should be rewarded. So he liked the classical world. He was really a classicist. Loved the Greeks, loved the Romans even more,
And a big emphasis on beauty.
and loved beauty. So yeah, he's a passion guy as well. But what he did not like about Christianity is that it prized the weak over the strong, the poor over the rich, the downtrodden over the rulers. And he thought that was just a decadent Christian excuse for hamstringing the powerful. And so what he wanted us to do is leave behind pity and compassion and the sort of Christian ethic that would say, a society should be judged on the way it treats its weakest members. We all think that that's a lovely thing. And Nietzsche was saying, well, that's not what your creator wants. Because if your creator is natural selection, as that quote from the Antichrist says, if natural selection is your creator, then really it's the survival of the fittest.
Mm.
And therefore the weakest can take the hindmost as the fittest ascend. And he was passion driven, but he wanted the strong to ascend, and he wanted to recapture a classical sense, not a horrible Christian sense, but a classical sense of just the glory of Rome and the glory of dominance and the glory of becoming an overman, right?
Mm.
Not one of these Christians who just they prize the weak, the low, and the botched. And Nietzsche was just basically saying, look, nature weeds out the weak, the low, and the botched. why on earth are we protecting those? Why can't we ascend to being a greater kind of a human being? And I mentioned Nietzsche in my book, The Air We Breathe, because what I want to do in The Air We Breathe is just make people notice the moral intuitions that they have. And that if you don't like Nietzsche saying that, I'm trying to get to your heart. I'm trying to say your moral intuitions at that point, your spidey senses. Like before I make a logical syllogism to you, before I give you a philosophical argument, I want you to do what Pascal said, which is to make people of goodwill wish it were true and then show that it is. So really what I'm trying to do with the Nietzsche thing is say, do you see the emotional sense that Christianity makes? Do you see the emotional sense of compassion being this supernatural thing? The instead of the survival of the fittest and the sacrifice of the weakest, in Christianity you have the sacrifice of the fittest, Christ, for the survival of the weakest. It's this. So I want to give you a sense. I want to give even an atheist a sense of the supernatural by saying nature goes in this direction. There's this otherworldly thing called compassion, called empathy, called pity. And if you resonate with that at all, I want you to wish it were true, and then hopefully I can show you that it is.
It's something that's troubled me recently. I had a debate, sat across the table from you, with Lois McClatchy-Miller, who's a good friend, about abortion.
Okay.
I took the pro-choice stance, and she took the pro-life stance.
Yeah.
And I found myself taking it down a bit more of a philosophical route, because that's what I'm interested in, and that's what I thought was going to be valuable for that conversation, rather than just hurling slogans at each other.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating seeing where I went to be logically consistent with my beliefs. And that was discarding the idea of life being sacred.
Right.
And if you're pro-choice, you have to align with that. You can't argue that life is sacred, but I want to abort a baby. It just doesn't work. It's not consistent, and it's disingenuous to argue otherwise. But that troubles me because I feel that it's wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't want to live in a world where that becomes the norm. And I guess the whole question is, what happens when that becomes the norm? Is there a slippery slope where other things are justified too? But it still doesn't convince me.
No.
And by not believing in God, by definition, I can't think that life is sacred. There's nothing to make it explicitly sacred. We can map on other words to it, but I can't think that it's sacred.
You can say there are human rights, but sacred brings in a transcendent dimension. Yeah.
Yes. And that's a big thing that's bothered me, because I don't live my life that way. But what's really fascinated me about Nietzsche and his perspective on this is that it's at least some attempt of cobbling together a morality without God.
Right.
It leads you to pretty absurd places.
Well, absurd. He wouldn't say it. He would say that the Christian thing was the absurd thing.
For sure.
Right.
But I guess what I've been struggling with is the idea that perhaps we need these delusions to exist and to flourish and to help the slaves and the babies that would have otherwise been discarded of in ancient Rome.
Yeah.
But there's no truth to it. And I spoke to Justin Briley briefly about this, and I've spoken to a couple of different people, but it'll be interesting to hear your insight into, I suppose, the whole sort of evolution versus truth argument, the idea of how we've gotten to the place that we're in, and could there have been a better solution than Christianity, but Christianity is kind of just filling that God-shaped hole in everyone. It's not necessarily true, but they need something to prop them up.
Man, so much there. Because Christianity is a blip in, that's what Nietzsche would think. Like Nietzsche would say, okay, if we go back to the classical world, you can discard the disabled children. You can discard, and many girls were exposed in the same way, which means, infanticide and that kind of thing. And it was Christianity that overturned the very widespread, it's almost a human universal infanticide. Christianity sort of uniquely and originally brought legislation against infanticide and made it a law that you need to raise your own offspring, and that we now take that for granted as though that's the normal thing, where actually in pre-Christian and non-Christian cultures, infanticide, just as abortion is sort of okay in the West. So infanticide is okay in lots of different cultures. And, and you get very post-Christian ethicists like Peter Singer saying, well, we could have post-birth abortion. Another word for that would be infanticide. And at various points, he's talked about different cutting off points. But interestingly, at one point, he did say, maybe after 4 weeks, we should make it a law that people have to raise their child and they can't kill their child after 4 weeks. And he based that on a Greek practice that a month after the birth of a child, you'd actually have a little ceremony in which you welcome them into the family. The first 4 weeks, you're kind of on tenterhooks, like, will we, won't we? And it's exactly that squint that I'm trying to go for. Like when I talk about these things, because that squint is a very Christian squint, right? That sense of, oh, we can't kill babies, can we? I would say that it's a profoundly Christian gut instinct that's being triggered at that point. And I'm wanting to pull at the thread of that gut instinct, and I think you can find Jesus on the other end. That's what The Air We Breathe is trying to do. I basically wrote it for my friend Sally, who is a secular humanist, and she once said to me, Glenn, of course you realize I could never be a believer. And it just led to this really interesting conversation, because she believes all sorts of stuff about human rights, for instance, right? And she might even use the word of life is sacred, but she believes it's a godless universe. It's a godless universe, but life is sacred. And in a sense, I think that secular humanism is cognitive dissonance. I believe in the humanism. I'm a Christian humanist. I just think the godless worldview doesn't go together with the humanism. And in a sense, I want to ease your, cognitive dissonance and say secular, humanist, pick one. And actually, certainly my friend Sally, like if you had to ask her, pin her against the wall and say, which is it? Is it a godless universe, or do we have human rights? And she was like, oh, we have human rights, obviously. Like, well, then no to the godless universe, right? That's essentially the argument I try and take people on. And it's not a sub-rational thing, because there's arguments about why Christianity leads to a vision of the person like that, and why a godless universe can't get you the humanism that you think it can. So the mind is involved. It's not a sub-rational thing, but it's definitely a hearty thing I'm trying to do.
Yeah, but I suppose your friend Sally, she would choose that perhaps out of emotion, because she does the squint. And she feels that the world she would live in if there was no God, there were no human rights, would be disgusting and it would be abhorrent.
Yes.
That doesn't mean it's true.
It doesn't, but I would push back against, is it emotion? I would say it's something deeper than that. It's a moral sense, a sense of value that goes deeper than, it goes deeper than, dopamine hits. It goes deeper than that physiological sense. It goes deeper than pure psychology. In the sense that, you look in the face of a child who in the Roman world might have been thrown out because she's a girl or because she's disabled. And you look in that face and you see someone who is worthy of provision and protection, who has an inherent dignity that is not based on anything they can do or achieve, but is inherent in them, is, you might say, God-given in them. I think what I want to do is say, when you look at that little girl, it's not just your emotions that are being triggered, it's a moral sense in you, conscience, you might say.
But do you think that sense would have been triggered if you lived in the time of the Roman Empire without the Christian water and Judeo-Christian values that you're swimming in?
Well, interestingly, there was a letter written by a soldier right around the year dot, right around the year zero. And I think his wife was back in Alexandria or something, and he was on maneuvers. And he writes to her, and, my darling, whatever her name was, and, I'll be back, in the autumn. Make sure the cows are sold to market or something. I've heard that you're pregnant. If it's a boy, keep it. If it's a girl, kill it. Send my regards to Alexamenos. Mend the fences. I'll be back in the autumn. And you get no sense in this letter that there's a twinge of conscience. You get no sense in this letter that he's agonizing of, I've thought long and hard about this, and if it's a girl, kill it. It very much was this sort of this sense of this is how the world is, right? And it's the survival of the fittest and the sacrifice of the weakest, and away we go. And so I think that's why I say that squint from you was a profoundly Christian squint. And I think that the twinge in Sally's guts when you talk about infanticide or something like that is a profoundly Christian twinge. But I think it goes deeper than gut emotion. I think we're in touch with something in the same way that I think you look at that baby girl and whatever you're feeling about that, I'm going to give that a name. I'm going to call that she is in the image of God. And by the image of God, I'll try and secularize my explanation of that, but I'll just say the most divine thing you could see on earth, right, is that little girl. And that nod, that's a very Christian nod, right? So, and so she is in the image of God with a little I. And then what I try to do in the book is then sort of take people to the cross of Jesus, because on the cross, Jesus is called the image of God with a capital I. And in this incredible paragraph, it's my favorite paragraph in all the Bible, Colossians chapter 1, it says, Christ is the image of the invisible God. It's the most divine thing you've ever seen. But the whole context is, yes, he's our maker and all the rest of it, but it just finishes with, and he made peace by the blood of his cross. And so the paragraph that begins, he is the image of God, makes you think there he is bleeding for his enemies. He looks weak. He looks despised. He is being cast away. He's being killed just as that little girl was about to be killed. And you've never seen anything more divine. And I say, if you look at that man on the cross and you think that's the most divine thing I've ever seen, because there is love incarnate. If you say that's the most divine thing I've ever seen, bad luck, you're a Christian. That's the way it happens. And what I'm constantly trying to do is to pull at the threads of that moral instinct, that valuation that you're constantly making, and say, you are a person of faith. You might think you're purely rational. You're just a decision maker, but no, there's not a mathematical proof that determines the way you navigate your world. You're much more elephant driven, but that elephant is not just emotion. That elephant is making a wager on life, right? You're constantly navigating this world, and you treat me as though I'm in the image of God. You don't use that language, but you do. You treat me like I'm in the image of God and you're in the image of God, which is a wager, which is a bet, because I might just behave like a mischievous chimpanzee, mightn't I? Right? I might just behave just like one more vicious animal, but you don't believe that, right? And it might cost you to trust in me like that, right? It's a costly thing for you to wager on me being in the image of God in a little I. And let's say later on in life, you have a child, and that child is disabled, and it's discovered in the womb. Well, you have a costly decision to make at that point. Am I going to see that sonogram, and that little child is in the image of God with a little I? It's a very costly thing for you to assume and live on the basis of, but it goes deeper than emotion. You're seeing a person in the image of God, and you're just going to behave accordingly. And that's what Lois tries to do. That's what she's trying to get all of us to do. See the images of God with a little I. But as she's doing that, she is pointing out what you say, which is the dignity of humanity, the sanctity of life that we all assume in all our interactions all the time, which means that you're a believer, right? You live by faith. I live by faith. We all live by faith. We can't not live by faith. And what I'm constantly trying to do is saying that faith that you live by in the West is profoundly Christian-ish. And let me see if I can show you the source of where that came from. And the resonance that you feel here, well, maybe you get to looking at Christ and you say, there's the source of the resonance I feel there. That's the journey I try to take people.
Well, what's difficult as an atheist is I could say what I'm feeling is just an evolved sense of the worth of human life, because otherwise, if no one had that, we'd all be killed. We'd nuke ourselves. It would be World War III if we even got to that point. But then the question becomes, why did it evolve so rapidly after this whole Christian movement? How did that come about, and why was that even necessary if we were thriving before that point? There was clearly some sort of necessity for this morality to emerge from somewhere. I mean, I suppose maybe it couldn't have been an evolutionary necessity. It could have just been the product of a few guys with a cool idea. But the profound change created in such a short duration of time, flipping the entire world's morality on its head.
Yeah.
It's a pretty profound thing to grapple with as an atheist.
Yeah. And that's why it's interesting that Nietzsche mentions, pity on the whole thwarts the law of selection, which is the law of evolution. So I think people sometimes critique Nietzsche by saying he had obviously a very primitive understanding of Darwin, because Darwin had, only 30 years earlier written on the origin of the species. And people sometimes say Nietzsche didn't really realize that the survival of the fittest does not just mean the biggest, buffest guy who can bash people, but it could be the cleverest, or it could be just the best adapted to their evolutionary niche. But I think the point still stands. I do think Nietzsche understood Darwin. The point still stands that the law of selection is that the best is rewarded, and the weakest, however we define weakest, is still winnowed out. And I do think Nietzsche was right to say that evolution would send you in a certain direction morally, but it wouldn't be the Christian direction. And I think a post-Christian morality, some of post-Christian humanist morality, I would say, is basically the rider on a Christian-ish elephant who, for all the world, says, "I don't believe in God, I don't believe in the Jesus story, and I'm still going to, mouth largely Christian-ish morals." That's what Nietzsche thought. He thought that humanists were basically Christianity light. Okay. And he basically said they don't understand what it would mean to actually get rid of the Jesus story. To get rid of the Jesus story really does mean to get rid of pity and all those other things. It really does mean to move into a world in which power and dominance reign. And so, yeah. So to follow evolution, I think Nietzsche was right about that. To follow evolution means to take a distinctly different route to the Christian route, which then raises the question, why has Christianity been so successful? Because evolutionarily, I don't think you would predict that, the meek shall inherit the earth is going to work if the world is purely Darwin. And I don't think you would predict, if you stood at the foot of that cross and you saw this guy choking to death, I don't think you would predict, it's world domination for this guy, right? There's something I would say supernatural about that, which is another piece of evidence that I would offer to your rational mind to chew on.
Yeah, you're just going to throw that on me and then hang me out to dry. It's so interesting to grapple with, and another thing that I've been thinking about a lot. I've kind of had these main trains of thought the last month. One of them has been the elephant and the rider. Another one has been the idea of faith versus doubt. And as soon as I started thinking about that more and more, I got a video popping up from you and your channel speaking about doubt and Descartes versus Pascal, and how these two guys essentially oppose each other in their worldviews. And Descartes comes first. You really seem to not like him, and then Pascal comes along. Yay! And the Christians love him. Yeah, there's our hero, the hero of the story. Talk to me about Descartes, the idea of doubting everything. And I think it would be interesting to map this onto modern life. Right. How, in a less philosophical sense, people seem to just have a lot more doubt generally towards everyday things.
Right. Descartes was also a Christian, and what people will always point out is that after he says, "I think, therefore I am," which is his famous kind of statement about where we should begin our thinking, the next thing he does is try to prove God's existence, and he does it with the ontological argument. So he is a believer as well. It's just that Pascal thought he was wrong and stupid. I think that's I said he was the great tweeter. I think thought number 77 or 78 was something like Pascal is wrong and stupid.
Literally just full stop after that. Pascal, Descartes, wrong and stupid.
Something like that. Yeah. So what does Descartes want to do? And I do understand the impulse of Descartes. Europe was absolutely tearing itself apart over religious issues. Okay, so about a century earlier, Martin Luther began the Protestant Reformation, and he was basically saying, you can't trust the Pope. Let's go back to the Bible, he was saying, but the Roman Catholic Church has gotten this, and this wrong, and we need to reform the church, and you can't trust the people who you thought you could trust. So then you've got this real question of doubt. Because for 1,000 years earlier, Europe had just, They had come out of paganism, and they'd come out of, where did the Vikings go? Oh, they all became Christians, and then for 1,000 years, people had thought, we know what's what. We can trust, and we begin with trust. And for 1,000 years in Europe, the whole point was faith-seeking understanding. That's what Augustine said. That's what a whole bunch of other theologians said. The way to know stuff is you begin with commitments of the heart and trust, and then you go out into the world on the basis of that trust, and you find confirmation as you go. Descartes, he's living in a world torn apart by religious wars. He fought in the religious wars on both sides. He was this mercenary gentleman soldier, first for the Protestants, then for the Catholics. And while he's actually, during his wintering, I don't think he saw a lot of, battle, but in the winter, it was cold. It was 1619. He went into this room, which was more like a stove, more like a sort of heating room. And he shut the door and he said, essentially, Mum and Dad are fighting. I'm going to slam the door, go to my room. The Protestants and the Catholics are fighting. I can't trust anybody. I'm going to start again. And so he started on this method of doubt, and he started with the things that he could possibly doubt. And he was like, well, you can doubt your experience. He was like, if I put a pen into this glass, it would look bent. We know that's because of diffraction, but the optical illusion means I can't trust my senses, right? And he's like, well, I can't trust experience. I certainly can't trust the holy books and the holy men. I can even doubt my reason. You think, well, how can you doubt your reason? 2 + 3 always equals 5. And Descartes was like, what if there's an evil demon who's constantly making me go wrong, like a genie who's messing with my mind? And, throughout philosophy, we had this idea, like, what if I'm just a brain in a vat being prodded by a mad scientist? Have you ever thought that? I used to think that a lot when I was like 10 or 11, am I just the dream of a butterfly, or, all that kind of stuff. So it's radical doubt, global doubt, because he wanted to get back to bedrock. And the thing he thought he could never doubt is the fact that he was doubting. If he's doubting, I guess he exists, right? And so cogito ergo sum, which in Latin means I think, therefore I am, or I doubt, therefore I am. And so he sort of shrunk his world back to rock solid certainty with the intention of then, on the basis of those certainties, being able to trust again. But notice, it is the doubting individual that is now the rock solid basis on which I'm going to build my worldview. I'm going to start with me, and I'm going to doubt everything unless it can jump through certain hoops that have been determined by just me in my method of doubt. That explains the modern world, right? It explains why. It explains why when I say you look into the face of a little girl and you know she is valuable, the modern mind is like, no, I don't know anything. I need to build it up from a sense of sort of mathematical certainty and out. And everything on the outside needs to justify its existence to me, beginning with God. And then, but you can sort of see how, do you know what solipsism means? It's sort of it's the idea that it's a person who doesn't trust anything else.
Yeah.
The whole world is just in my mind. You're a figment of my imagination. All other minds are a figment of my imagination. The external world is all in my mind. I think basically the West, since Descartes, has been solipsistic. We've expanded the circle a little bit because Descartes was very helpful with the scientific method. He'd built out his world a little bit so that, we've got the doubting self, but we will, through the experimental method, kind of grant the existence of, tables and rocks and chairs and trees and physical things. But that's kind of where modern man is, right? where Descartes doubting the existence of everything beyond. And that leaves God out of the picture. But also it starts to leave out of the picture things like goodness, truth, beauty, love, freedom, consciousness, rationality. And we've sort of lost all those things and we're just left with our doubting selves.
How does that contrast to Pascal?
Well, Pascal, in the tradition of Augustine, says we believe in order to understand that even if you do science, right, Why did we build the Large Hadron Collider? Because we had some hunches that were, based on reason, but we had some hunches that the Higgs boson is out there. And Higgs had done all his, calculations. And if he was right about X, Y, and Z, there ought to be a particle that's out there. And if we just smash together, particles at near light speed, the boson will be found. And what do you call that? You call that sort of faith-seeking understanding, actually. And the entire, even science, proceeds on the basis of a value structure. This is, again, where Jordan Peterson is very helpful. You don't see a world of mere facts. You don't just see this table. This table is not fundamentally a plank of wood with 4 legs. This table is fundamentally something that we can lean on and have a great conversation about. And it's something that we can sit at and eat at. And it has function. And even if you want to boil it down to its facticity, why am I just labeling this a table? I could have a lot finer grade of analysis. I could have a much broader grade of analysis. I'm bringing a value structure to bear, even as I'm assessing something as prosaic as a table. And so the whole idea that there is a world of fact and a world of value just is not the case. And yet that great rupture began with Descartes, really. It began. And I think Pascal and others like him help us to say we're always valuing creatures, even as we're dealing with the facts.
I realized the other day that I was actually baptized a Lutheran.
Man, Luther is,
and
faith. It's about faith, man. Yeah.
It's all about faith.
Yeah.
And this has been fascinating me. This is now my rider just mapping on a coincidence to this whole situation.
Oh, it's no coincidence. There are no coincidences.
But Luther says, faith is a living, daring confidence in God's grace, so sure and certain that a man could stake his life on it 1,000 times. And I completely agree. It's so true that we put faith in something, and I would argue that atheists are just as religious as Christians, potentially more on occasions. We all need faith to exist. We all need a certain level of doubt to exist too. We need doubt to help with filtration. I think doubt is the equivalent of hacking away at a piece of marble, and faith is what keeps you from smashing the sculpture. You need that faith to actually guide you in the direction of something. There's this dance, this push and pull between doubt and faith.
Yes.
Do you think we've gone too far into doubt? You've already suggested that we may well have done thanks to Descartes. And how do we bring ourselves back into this pull of faith without being reckless?
Yeah. I think one thing is that, yes, we've become too doubting. We've also become too rationalizing since Descartes, such that when I say faith, people when I say faith, someone who's not a Christian thinks, oh, Glen believes. He doesn't know, but he believes. And faith, I think, in a secular understanding, is often thought of as an inferior kind of knowledge. The best kind of knowledge is fact and scientific truth and mathematical certainty. And faith is a kind of a lesser knowledge. And so when Pascal or Luther or anyone else is heard to be saying, no, faith is the thing, a couple of things can happen. One, somebody can think, oh, so you throw truth out the window. Another mistake people can make is to say, oh, if faith is the right thing, then faith needs to be as certain as mathematical proof. That, my belief that Jesus is the Son of God needs to be exactly the same as my belief that 2 + 3 = 5, which is not what Christians are saying at all. Faith it's trust. Therefore, it's irreducibly personal. And I trust my wife in a way that's very different to I trust the law of non-contradiction, or, I trust that 2 + 3 = 5. So I think Descartes' done us a double disservice because he's made us rationalists as regards faith. And it means that a non-Christian considering Christianity might be sitting there thinking, I need to be as certain that Jesus is the Son of God as I am, that the sun will come up tomorrow, or some logical truth. It's not that. It's not an inferior kind of knowledge. It's a different kind of a knowledge. And it's important to know that Luther doubted a lot, like a lot, and constantly had to remind himself of the word coming from outside, and constantly had to be involved in a community of faith where people are kind of telling him the truth and submitting to that as well. So, yeah, don't hear me saying that faith is more certain than truth, therefore it's more like mathematics than it is like instinct. It's not inferior, but it's not a mathematical certainty that we're seeking.
Where is the room for doubt in this equation?
In the same way, I look at the little girl who might be tossed out onto a rubbish dump in the first century. Am I going to adopt her into my family? I have a lot of doubts about that, right? I have a heck of a lot of doubts about that. Do we have the capacity? Is there room in our family? Am I always going to love her the way I love my other children? I might have all sorts of doubts, but it's and at every level of relationship, faith and doubt are in this dance, as you say. And so, yeah, there's definitely all sorts of room for doubt in that sense, because it's a relationship, and it's a relationship with a person. Which just brings you into a realm that's just very different from logic, maths, all that kind of stuff.
I think something that kind of brings together everything that we've been speaking about so far is Ian McGilchrist's idea of the left brain and the right brain. And he's recently, I remember Justin speaking in his book about how he's kind of panpsychist now. He's into panpsychism, and he's very hesitant to just stop at materialism. And this is a guy that traditionally may have been wheeled on stage as kind of the opposite answer to Christian beliefs in metaphysical values.
Yes.
But no, he's not that.
Yeah.
And it's worth fleshing out here. The left brain, it deals more with problem solving, and it's the rider in the equation. It's mapping on reason for something happening.
Yeah.
The right brain, it's more creative. It imagines stories, and it's responsible for bigger picture thinking.
Yes.
And there are some great experiments with the left brain and the right brain that illustrate this nicely. So I had Abbot Christopher Jamison on my show, and he speaks about the experiment that Ian McGilchrist did. They get someone to draw a tree, someone that only has access. I can't remember what it's called now. I think it's a corpus callosum. Yes, but it's a corpus callosotomy that you have, which separates the corpus callosum that links the left brain and the right brain together and lets them communicate with each other, in which they actually suppress each other's communication more than they do enable it.
Right. Yeah.
Someone's had one of them, and that means that they have access to purely left brain thought or purely right brain thought. They get this person with the left brain thought to draw a tree. They draw an incredibly detailed picture of half the tree. The person engaging in this purely with their right brain, they draw an overall picture of a tree really badly because they can get the story. They can get the narrative of what a tree is. They can imagine it, but they don't have any of the detail.
Yes.
I think that very neatly fleshes out the sort of the dance between the left brain and the right brain. But another interesting experiment was when they got someone, I think, to access the right brain, they flashed up a card visually, maybe to the left vision field, because the right brain is connected to the left vision field. So they flash up this card of instructions, which tells someone to walk across a room. Their right brain follows the instruction. They walk across the room, and then to access the left brain, they ask them, why did you walk across the room? The left brain has no idea why they walked across the room, because only the right brain has been given this instruction. So you'd think that the left brain says, I have no idea. But it doesn't. It maps on a reason randomly. It says, oh, I was thirsty. I needed a glass of water. Or I needed to stretch my legs. I've been lying down for so long.
Yes.
That for me is terrifying because it illustrates in scientific experiment form this idea of the elephant and the rider. And it's mapping it on after the fact.
We are rationalizers more than rational all the time. And I find it interesting that Ian McGilchrist kind of in order to reach a culture that is so left-brained, he has to do so as a neuroscientist, because he is many other things. Like he is a philosopher, and he's worn many different hats.
Yeah.
But I think as a missionary to this post-Descartes world that is incredibly rationalizing, it is interesting. He's had the most amount of breakthrough by doing so in scientific terms. Like, neuroscience proves this.
So true.
Yeah, it's like that's the way to reach a left brain.
Yeah,
right? Is to do it via neuroscience. But yeah.
Where do you think we're going in terms of left brain, right brain in regards to society? Because the reason I say I think this links everything together, there's this whole problem of doubt versus faith. And I think doubting is a very left brain activity, whereas faith is a very right brain activity. To perhaps simplify it a little bit into secular terms. It feels like we need to regain access to this idea of narrative to be able to actually have the faith. And to put it in very crude atheist terms, I see faith as a necessary tool for everything in life, regardless of how big or small that feat is. Me getting in the car this morning, I had the faith that I'd make it here alive and that I'd have driving ability based on past experience.
Your brakes would work, and everyone else would obey the rules.
Exactly. There are endless things. But it really feels to me anecdotally like we're losing that in society. And I think that's at the root of this meaning crisis that's facing Gen Z. It's this over quantifying of problems. And it's the underappreciation of faith as a tool, and that actually by assuming that things are going to be okay, they're probably going to be okay. By assuming that something's going to work, you're automatically closing yourself off to the idea of anything ever getting better. And it's terrifying, and I keep on seeing it get worse and worse. And I don't know. I mean, it must be the case that it's because I've done more podcasting than ever this year that I'm seeing more problems with my generation. It's probably confirmation bias. It's probably a negativity bias, kind of wanting to nitpick at bad things for the sake of views and a good title, even if I don't actually think that consciously. I'm sure that plays into it subconsciously. But I must say, even anecdotally, young men, well, statistically, young men are going to church more and more. But then on the anecdotal level, more and more of my friends are suffering. The ones, most of the time, that aren't going to church. A lot of my mum's friends that have daughters who are 20, 21, they've dropped out of university because I guess you could say they didn't have faith in what they were studying. They didn't feel that it aligned with their heart. All of these issues that we've kind of laid out so far in this first hour of the pod, they're all converging into this Molotov cocktail of destruction for our generation. Where do we even start with starting to unpick these issues and try to move towards some sort of solution?
Let me give you some hope. Because I do think, I heard Mary Harrington recently on a podcast say she's not surprised at the uptick in interest in faith and spirituality from Gen Z. Are we saying Z or Z? What are we saying?
We had this conversation earlier off camera. I say Z. I like it.
Yeah, let's go Z. Let's go Z. So I because it's not just Gen Z, it's Gen Zeal, right? So was that a very Gen X thing to say?
It was. Yeah, it's probably more of a boomer thing.
It is a really boomer thing. I mean, interestingly, at the beginning of the year, one survey showed that Gen Z are twice as likely to say they're spiritual than their Gen X parents and boomer parents. They are half as likely to say they're atheists as their Gen X parents. That doesn't necessarily mean they're all coming to church, although there are increasing numbers coming to church. But I think witch talk is also a thing, and trying ayahuasca and all sorts of spiritual paths, and reading the Quran and posting about it. I think more and more people are opening themselves up to a narratival way of viewing the world. And Mary Harrington said, well, the internet, for all its faults, and there are many, the internet does actually encourage an imagistic view of the world and pattern recognition. I'm getting a little piece from here and a little piece from there. And those two things are kind of like that thing that I remember. And we vibe our way across the internet, and we vibe our way into the world. And I think that is probably more like the elephant. And it's more like the way that human beings are actually wired, in that we don't really follow a linear train of logical thought, but we notice this and that, and this and that are like this, and that is that. And the internet, she said, is encouraging that kind of pattern recognition, that kind of imagistic way of feeling our way through the world. And she said, I'm not at all surprised, that Christianity is experiencing a little bit of a resurgence among younger people, but also all kinds of other spiritual views of the world. Now, I'm very happy about lots of people, lots of new interest in Christian faith, but not any old narrative will help you in this world. And so it's a mixed report. So let me give you a little bit of hope, but also, I have some fears as well, that in an atomized world, Christianity is back on the table as one potential narrative that might unite the world. But there are a whole bunch of other ones, and I would say choose wisely.
I wonder if the technology that we have access to has caused an evolutionary mismatch where, as humans, evolution selects for people who are capable of the belief in the transcendent. Technology actively pulls against that.
Why does technology pull against that?
Because it puts everything into a quantifiable form. And I think that it is so powerful that it can override the evolutionary predisposition to believe in the transcendent. And I think this aligns with what's happening, because there are still people pushing against it. They've still got that instinct. And you often see that a lot of people that are off social media, they are from religious backgrounds. Now, it's kind of a chicken and egg question there.
Yeah.
But I do think it pulls against, potentially, again, like bro philosophy here, evolution selecting for people who are capable of this belief in the transcendent, of metaphysical. And what we've got at the moment in this new technological revolution is something that kind of is constantly undermining that.
Yeah. So Jonathan Haidt, we've mentioned two of his books, Happiness Hypothesis, Righteous Mind. He also wrote The Anxious Generation, his most recent book, and he does talk about the anxiety and social media kind of very much going hand in hand. And he does say that those from religious communities have a protective effect against the atomization of social media and against anxiety. And the Quiet Revival statistics coming out of the Bible Society back in April, they tended to say that churchgoers, anxiety levels are through the roof, especially for Gen Z. But they are much better. There's much more peace and less anxiety among churchgoers, certainly in that report. As for the evolution selecting for those who believe in the transcendent, there's which causes which, because I think really to have kids, you need to believe in the future. And it's a very costly, talk about a costly belief, right? Okay, we're going to bring another human being into the world that's going to cost us 6 figures plus. Here's a costly decision, and it's going to absolutely transform the next 20 years of my life and the whole of the rest of my life.
Okay, this is me being pedantic here, but do you have to have a belief in the future to have kids? Does that necessarily follow, or do you think it would just be an instinct?
If you intentionally do it, I think you do. Because you need to plan for the next 18 years, right? If you accidentally have a kid, then there's been no forethought. But if you say, honey, let's make a baby, you're not just having that fun one night. You're investing in the next decades.
I guess it depends what you mean by belief in the future. That the future exists, obviously, but maybe not necessarily that the future is going to be a good one.
Yeah. So you need to believe. That you will still be the same kind of person who wants to be outwardly focused and sacrificial in 20 years' time. You need to believe that human beings are a net positive for the planet, which is not a given in today's environment. People often think of kids as though they're just like carbon footprints, and let's reduce the carbon footprint, so let's not have kids anymore. That's a real example of people not believing in the future, believing human beings are a net negative, and that is one factor in why our birth rates are absolutely tanking.
Yeah, I agree with you. You see it. People have lost that faith in the future, and therefore they're saying, I'm not going to have any kids because it's not worth bringing them to the planet. I mean, that's such a commonly held belief. And I spoke to Stephen J. Shaw. Jeevan Stace Shaw, I was about to say. That's a new name for him. Spoke to Stephen J. Shaw the other day on the pod about depopulation.
Yeah.
And he laid out this troubling issue that Gen Z have for me that I haven't even thought of before. And it's super obvious. It's the fact that we see people having kids at a later age and we see people complaining about the future. Therefore, we get into a spiral where we say, no one's trying for kids age 20, 25, 26. They're trying when they're 33, 34. So I'm not going to bother until I'm that age.
Yeah.
And it just perpetuates further and further, and the years get pushed back, 34,
and your
35.
fertility falls off a cliff after about 32.
Depopulation. Anyway, tangent.
Yeah.
Faith in the future.
Yeah. So interesting in the Bible that like the number one analogy for this suffering world is that it's like labor pains, right? Old Testament, New Testament, it's all throughout the Bible that the sufferings that we're going through in this world are like labor pains, which is an ultimately hopeful vision because the pains give way to new birth, right? And the suffering is actually achieving something and bringing about a greater goodness. And at the heart of the Christian message, you've got this guy on a cross, the suffering the most, and he seems to think it's worth it, right? Like in the New Testament, it says that for the joy that's set before him, he endures the cross. And it's like Jesus does the calculation. Is all the suffering of the world worth it? And I think that's a question that Gen Z and many others struggle to answer. Is the suffering of all this world worth it? And I don't know because I can't make that calculation. Ultimately, you don't know because you can't make that calculation. But the Christian belief is there's a guy who's in a position to make the calculation. And he ultimately thought it was worth it, right? And he endured the cross. And, you know, Christians believe all the suffering of the world is kind of like burning down like a magnifying glass, like focusing the rays of the sun onto him. He's experiencing the suffering of the world and he thinks it's worth it because through the childbearing pains, there is birth and there is a future. And I think a culture that puts that vision at its heart is a culture that's going to have babies. Also, a culture that's going to have babies is a culture that's constantly saying outbreed the infidel, right? And I think there are religious cultures that are absolutely going to certainly outbreed us in the secular West, and they are going to predominate, and so it will be the religious. I think the future belongs to the religious.
Yeah.
But again, I wouldn't say every single narrative is equal, and I would say choose wisely again.
We've touched on depopulation, and it kind of just sprung this into my mind. I was at the Festival of Speed at Goodwood the other week, and there, as well as all of these posh cars, they've got this exhibit called Future Labs, where it's a bunch of technology based around the future. So the newest AI robot being developed, things that can crawl upstairs, things that can serve you coffee. And I ended up debating an AI robot about human rights and whether they exist.
Okay.
And I continuously got these shallow kind of political buzzword answers back of human rights are intrinsic to all humans. Okay, cool, but cut a human open and where are they? I kept on asking it and it would kind of just loop itself, you know. Human rights are intrinsic to all.
At that point.
Yeah, exactly.
Got a psychopath on our hands.
But something I'd be really interested to have a chat about is the future of AI and maybe technology more broadly, and ethics within that, because I think ultimately we speak about AI robots maybe taking over the world and killing all humans because we're an inconvenience to their 1 billion IQ intellect. I think that depends on the programmer, and it depends on the ethical structure that programmer follows. So it was crazy seeing this robot. Like, it could move, it could grab things. It's literally geared up to serve a coffee, to drive an Uber, whatever. Within a few years, I think that's going to happen. So I don't think these are abstract conversations to be having.
No.
What happens when we have AI that are interacting with humans? Do we need an ethical structure? And do you think we're going to be able to manage to give it one that's secular?
I think Christians, I'll say this much. I think Christians certainly have an advantage when we think about the question of AI because I think it's Descartes who gives us our vision of humans simply as rationalizers. and that the person is simply a thinker. Interestingly, Descartes didn't even have a place for the body. You can doubt your body, right? And I think a Cartesian world, a post-Descartes world, is liable to think that personhood equals rationality, or personhood equals, and at that point, it's almost like personhood equals computational power. And two dangers, vast dangers arise. One is we think we're robots, and two is we think they're people, right? And I think a Christian can come along and say, no, you're not a robot, and that's not a person. And it doesn't actually think. It is computing a lot of different scenarios, but I do think John Searle's Chinese room experiment is pretty conclusive that these machines cannot think. So his Chinese room experiment is, imagine you're sent into a room and you don't speak Chinese, but somebody is told that in this room there is a fluent Chinese speaker, and if you just hand a Chinese symbol through this letterbox, Elliot will pick up the symbol, and all Elliot's doing is actually he's looking on the wall and he's saying, oh no, that refers to that symbol, and you take out the English word and you post it out of the output letterbox. My experience on the outside of this room is Elliot's a fluent Chinese speaker, right? But the big question John Searle asks is, does Elliot speak Chinese? Does he understand what he's doing? And everybody answers that question. No, obviously Elliot doesn't understand. And all you need to do to go from that to what AI is like, you just need a billion Elliots in there. But a billion Elliots in there does not therefore make any one of those Elliots understand what's going on. So I think Christians can say cheerfully and confidently, I'm not a computer and computers aren't people. And I think therefore Christians can be a lot more hopeful and see, yes, there's dangers to technology. We've got the Tower of Babel in our Bibles. The 11th chapter of the Bible is all about people who through technology think we're going to get up to heaven and we're going to bake our bricks and it was the greatest technology and we're going to get up all the way up to God. And of course, it all comes tumbling down. So Christians can see that there can be delusions of grandeur at the heart of technology. And you look at some of the tech bros and the tech billionaires, and there are definitely some delusions of grandeur. They think they're building a Tower of Babel. I think ultimately, I know where that story leads. I think that eventually God laughs at that, and certainly more of those delusions of grandeur end up sowing the seeds of their own demise. And I think the technology is ultimately our friend if it humanizes us. I think the real danger is not what AI will do to us, like it's Skynet. I think the real danger is what we will do to ourselves through AI, which is the axiom humans, right? In WALL-E, what's the dystopian tech future? It's not that the robots start a war and it's, lasers everywhere. It's these massively obese humans just, sipping on milkshakes, like part man, part screen, utterly dehumanized through the technology. There are dangers to AI, but I think we can ultimately be hopeful.
The thought experiment reminds me of Mary's room.
Yes.
Based around knowledge.
Yes.
So Mary's locked in a room from birth.
Yes.
There's no color whatsoever. And all she's given is textbooks learning about color science. She's never exposed to it, but she learns all the knowledge possible to learn about the science of color. Your eyes, the way the cornea interacts with the light bouncing off and blah, blah, blah. And then one day she's in this room. I don't know how long they say she's been in the room for, but she's at a point where she has all knowledge possible to possess about understanding color science.
Yeah.
On her black and white TV screen, a malfunction occurs.
Yeah.
And a red square pops up on her screen. Does she learn anything new?
Yeah.
About what red is?
Yeah.
To me, it's obvious that she does. And I think it's obvious that there are certain forms of knowledge that can only be possessed by experience.
Right.
How does that tie into the AI human secular debate, I would say? Because Christians, you guys have your problem solver. It's God. Secularists don't. Is there any way of bridging that gap, even in a secular fashion, kind of borrowing from Mary's Room?
Yeah, Mary's Room or the Chinese Room experiment are both just philosophical arguments, which go to show that a reductionistic, rationalistic view of the world is not actually the world that we inhabit. We do inhabit a world of color. And it was sort of John Locke that really made the move post-Descartes of saying, okay, well, let's just say that there's size, shape, and location. And science is really brilliant at doing size, shape, and location, and we'll leave every other question, like color, out of the scientific domain. And science has done a brilliant job at, size, shape, and location, and it's done a really good job at doing everything that Mary does in Mary's Room. Meanwhile, the rest of humanity is actually living in color, and I think that's a good analogy, really, for life, if Descartes was true, is basically a life in black and white. And I'm inviting people to come into Technicolor.
I want us to take a bit of a turn in a random direction here. But before we run out of time, I wanted to pick your brains on something that we haven't spoken about before. And that's how technology and media and different forms of media have impacted the theological discussion. How apologetics have shifted the last decade or so, thanks to long-form content. Perhaps before the media was perfectly suited to new atheists coming on, giving cool vox pops for 5 minutes, slating the existence of God before getting carted off stage, and plenty of rounds of applause to it. How has that affected, especially the last few years, the discourse? We've spoken about the rise of Jordan Peterson and his battles with faith, his wrestling with God. We've spoken about that the last episode. But how does that feed into a bigger picture of the discourse based on technology, media?
Yeah. Well, back to what Mary Harrington said, in a world of pattern recognition, I think a religious worldview will do better.
Yeah.
In a world of atomized facts, that tends to play into more the Cartesian, the rationalizing kind of mindset. And yeah, it is no coincidence, I don't think, that Jordan Peterson giving very long lectures kind of works in a podcasting world. Is it significant that the biggest podcaster in the world has gone from kind of a new atheist figure to going to church now? Joe Rogan has been on that journey. Is he a kind of an avatar of the zeitgeist? Is he? I mean, it is interesting that a lot of the big podcasters are now entertaining things about faith and church. Why might that be? I do think a literate world, which was the sort of the modernist world, and Martin Luther gave birth to that in lots of different ways. He was getting pamphlets and tracts out there, and he was absolutely beasting the new media, and he dominated. Brand Luther is a great book about how there was a new technology called the printing press, and the Roman Catholic Church was rubbish at it. And Martin Luther was amazing at it, and things went viral. Pamphlets went viral, and that dissemination led to all sorts of fracture in Europe, actually. There was a one-controlled narrative, and the Protestants certainly benefited from there being a form of technology that enabled dissenting voices to go viral, to go big. And maybe it's the case that the new media in its infancy might have favored the new atheists, and maybe the new media, as it's developed a little bit longer into long form, can benefit the faith position. I'll have to think about that a little bit more, but definitely it's worth thinking about how technology and faith absolutely they absolutely mutually inform one another. Like, have you ever seen those experiments? I'm sure you've done them before, where somebody just puts the word red up on a screen, but it's in brown, and they say, "What color is that word?" And you say, it's really hard to say what the color is, because you've got a literate mind, and literature. The written text has absolutely rewired our brains to be very weird brains, and psychologists are kind of noticing that a lot. So is the new media rewiring our brains from literate to more vibey? I don't know. It's worth thinking about.
think it certainly is. And the whole Jordan Peterson situation recently, I think, was a good example of someone tossed into a media format that they're not familiar with him going on Surrounded. It seems like no one came out of that happy. Do you think that was symbolic of anything greater than him just having a bad day? Or do you think it was just an off day for him?
I heard Jonathan Peugeot reflect on that Surrounded debate. And he said it's interesting. It can be too easy to see Jordan Peterson as being very cagey about the faith issue and not telling us what he thinks. But Jonathan, who's a great friend of Jordan Peterson, said he's actually being incredibly honest in those moments. He genuinely doesn't want to be pinned down and doesn't feel able to be pinned down on the faith question. And so when he's asked, he's not boxing clever. When he's asked, he is so reflective upon, well, my elephant today did not go in a very Christian direction. So how would I have the audacity to say that I'm Christian? Because when I do my elephant tracker app, I discover that I've gone off into all sorts of non-Christian directions. And so I thought that was interesting. I don't think the format of Surrounded is geared towards truth. It's geared towards spectacle, and fair play to them. They are getting the views, but they're certainly not clarifying very many issues. But I did think that was interesting that Peugeot was saying Peterson is not being disingenuous at that point. He's genuinely telling you he doesn't know, so believe him.
Last time you were on the show, we spoke about Peterson's impact on Christianity, but we didn't actually really flesh out if he is a Christian at all. What do you think he gets wrong about Christianity? I've seen a lot of Christians criticizing certain arguments he made in that Surrounded debate.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are leapfrogging him into church and finding him a very helpful route into church. I think, he wrote 12 rules for life and then 12 more rules for life. And I think what he gets in Christian terms is the law, and what he misses is the gospel. The law is, this is the good life, thou shalt do it. The gospel is, but you don't live it, do you? You need forgiveness, right? And essentially, I think Jordan Peterson is very good at describing the law, describing the good life. You read, I haven't read more Rules for Life or whatever that one is, but I did read 12 Rules for Life, and he quotes scripture in it again and again. And when he quotes scripture, it lands in ways that are heavier and more powerful than in many Christian books that I read. He'll just talk about the Sermon on the Mount or something from Proverbs or something, and it really, really lands. And that is kind of Christianity as a ladder. But neither Protestants nor Catholics nor Orthodox think that Christianity ultimately is a ladder. The sign of Christianity is a cross, in which the one from heaven comes down, not simply to teach us how to be good. He comes down because we're bad, to die for our badness, to set us on our feet again as children and say, now as a forgiven child, you can live those rules for life. But the rules for life are not the way into a family, because you can't earn your way into a family. You've got to be born into a family. That's why Jesus said you've got to be born again, right? Into the family. So the gospel is what Christianity is most fundamentally about. The law is really helpful. It's good, but it's not the way in. And I think it's so interesting that Moses in the Bible is like narratively, this is what happened. Moses is the guy who gives the law from Mount Sinai. He ends up dying short of the promised land. Like he gets to look up, he goes up a mountain and he gets to see the land of milk and honey that's been promised to the children of Israel. And Mr. Law doesn't make it into the promised land. But his young assistant, Joshua, whose name means Jesus, he gets into the promised land, and those who trust him, right? And so I think narratively, the Old Testament is kind of saying the law is good, gets you so far, but you need Jesus and to trust Jesus to get the new life that he's offering.
I wanted to share with you an update on my position on faith since we last podcasted and last saw each other.
Updates are live. Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go.
And I spoke to Justin about this on our pod as well. And that is that it used to be, if I looked deep within, that my heart didn't want Christianity to be true. because I wanted to be in control of my own destiny. I wanted to build my own life and not have God impose anything on me. Whereas intellectually, I was open to the idea of God's existence. Now, I feel like I've experienced a flip where I really wish it was true. I've engaged with a lot of the apologetics surrounding it, the intellectual side, and that's actually brought, if you want to call it my heart into wanting it. So many things to unpack there. But even just to pick up on the point of before, wanting to create my own destiny, whatever that may mean. And I think that's wired into all of us. I've kind of realized intellectually that without a God, there's no free will anyway. So everything's determined. There's no morality. I'd quite like there to be an objective morality where man is made in the image of God.
You certainly live that way.
Precisely. So my heart, I very much feel is open to the idea. And I had a whole conversation with Justin about non-resistant non-believers and whether they exist. And I don't know, maybe there's something stopping me from quite wanting it in my heart truly, because maybe that would actually mean that I made the leap of faith. But what I struggle with is this leap of faith intellectually. I'm very much persuaded by the possibility that religion is a necessity for society to flourish, but it's not true. That it aids a better society that seems more just, and imposing an objective morality on the world is good for us, generally speaking. But I'm not convinced that it's the truth. And there are plenty of things, and any Christian would accept that there are some pretty wild claims in the Bible that I need to grapple with and become more attuned to before I can make that leap of faith. And we've discussed faith a lot in this podcast, and I completely get and respect that idea of faith, that I can't just think my way into Christianity. That's not how it works. But I do have doubts, and there are things that I don't believe. So it's kind of that flip. And I really, really feel, for what it's worth, there is some sort of way of squaring the whole ethical morality question without having to go to the metaphysical. That's kind of where my faith lies, is that there is some sort of moral landscape that Sam Harris speaks about, although he's been slated by Alex O'Connor even about his ideas on an objective grounding in morality. But I think that there is a project that can be put together that may outdo the moral landscape and actually come to a solid bedrock. That's where my faith lies at the moment. And that's what makes me convinced for now that Christianity perhaps isn't true, and it's just a nice thing that leads us to flourishing.
Well, you might come up with the moral landscape 2.0, and then you don't need Jesus on the cross. And at that point, my heart just says, you're not going to do better as a vision of ultimate reality. Like, who can out-narrate this vision of ultimate reality is that you've got the highest figure descending to the lowest depth to give the greatest sacrifice for the entire world to make everything okay forever. The dimensions of this story are unimprovable. Why walk away from the picture of Christ on the cross? And I guess what I'd encourage you to do is, you're quite right, you're not going to think your way into this. That is to put too much faith in the writer, right? You're not going to think your way into this. But Rupert Short has written some beautiful books. He says we don't think our way into a new way of living. We live our way into a new way of thinking. And there's something about embodied practice. There's something about community. There's something about hearing the word from beyond. There's something about putting yourself in the way of this grand narrative, this great story, that I think ultimately does win the heart and head. And I just encourage you to keep looking at that, because I don't think you'll do better than God poured out with every drop of his blood for you. I think even technically there's not a better story than that, right? So why go for the pale imitations, Elliot? That's what I say.
And it's worth analyzing what I'm actually thinking here by being open to the possibility that the Bible could just be a load of nice stories.
Yeah.
And that is that I am smarter than all of these people that are deluded and who have followed a narrative that's not true for the sake of a nicer life. Now, that's not what I feel. That's not what I'm thinking. But maybe that is the extension of what my worldview is at the moment. But I still think that skepticism is justified to a certain extent. That there's a possibility for these things to occur. We've seen it before in history with people being overcome with the truth of how gods are in charge of the sea and love and beauty and whatever else.
Yeah.
So it's not beyond our imagination for humans to be fooled into things that aren't true,
completely.
that serve them. And that's where my skepticism lies.
And I guess at that point, I'd say doubt more. Because it's true that Jesus might be wrong. It's also true that René Descartes might be wrong. And let me give you some evidence for why René Descartes might be wrong, because I think with him, you have traded away consciousness and rationality and goodness, truth, beauty, love. I think you've traded away free will. You've traded away a lot. And a purely godless interpretation of how we got here has to believe all sorts of weird stuff too. Like you have to believe that everything came from nothing, that order came from chaos, that life came from non-life, that minds came from mindless matter, and that the Christian message and Christian revolution has took hold of this world, and that guy choking to death on the cross was just a guy. You know? And a non-weird view of the world is not an option for anybody, right? That's not an offer on the table. Like, and I tend to think that the solipsistic world that says, actually, I doubt God, but I also doubt goodness, truth, beauty, love, consciousness, rationality, free will, and that I also have to embrace these four miracles that have no miracle worker, everything from nothing, order from chaos, life from non-life, minds from mindless matter. Fine, you can do that. I believe weird stuff. Jesus was born of a virgin. He sits at the right hand of the Father right now. He'll come with glory to judge the living and the dead. I believe really weird stuff. But it's like choose your miracle. Like which the non-miraculous view of the world is not an option. And at that stage, I'm not simply saying trust the Jesus thing. I'm also saying doubt your doubts, right? And especially doubt your doubts because the very person who is doing that doubting is a person with value that's made in God's image, who's conscious, who's got a moral sensibility to you, all those sorts of things, which I think is massively tilts you towards the Jesus thing. And I would say at that point, put yourself in the way of the Christian story, read through the Gospels, meet the Jesus who is there. And if you still want to walk away from him, you can walk away from him. But I think at that stage, you're walking away from the certainly the greatest story ever told.
C.S. Lewis says, supposing there was no intelligence behind the universe, no creative mind, in that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. It is merely that when the atoms inside my skull happen for physical or chemical reasons to arrange themselves in a certain way, this gives me, as a byproduct, the sensation I call thought. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? It's like upsetting a milk jug and hoping that the way the splash arranges itself will give you a map of London. I love that quote so much.
Should we pray? Let's pray. Lewis was the best, wasn't he?
He was. And I'm reading Mere Christianity at the moment, gifted by our friend Sophie Spittle. So that's been a lot of food for thought as well.
Yeah. Oh, man, you're asking for it, Elliot. You're asking for it.
Glen Scrivener, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I've been looking forward to getting you back on and picking your brains on a bunch of things for a long time. So I appreciate your time. Where can people find more of your rebranded work?
Oh, well, you can go to YouTube and search for Speak Life, our channel, and give us a like and a subscribe. And if people want to explore the Christian faith more, there's 321course.com is just an online course that gets to the heart of Christianity 101, really.